This is the story of a newly in love couple. The man has just discovered that his beloved woman has some kind of illness, prompting him to try to distance himself from her. When the woman begins to realize this, she starts to threaten the man, leading to a series of eerie and terrifying events. Before we dive into our scary story, we would like to ask everyone to like and subscribe to support us in continuing to bring you more terrifying tales in the future. This story was told to me by Kim, and it's about his friend, Kaleb. Kaleb often calls Kim to talk about his problems, and even Kaleb's mother frequently consults Kim when issues arise. Kaleb is a handsome guy, and he's somewhat of a flirt. Because of his good looks and playful personality, many people are drawn to him. He eventually met a girl named Tanya. At the same time, he had just been accepted as a non-commissioned officer in the military. Tanya is quite cute, and Kaleb often found himself glancing at her. Eventually, they started talking and became a couple since Tanya was also a nice person. While dating Tanya, Kaleb would often tell Kim about what Tanya was like, her personality, and other details. He mentioned that Tanya's family lived in Sakan, where her parents owned a melon farm. Not long after, Kaleb and Tanya began seeing each other frequently. One day, Tanya told Kaleb that she wanted to invite him to visit Sakan. Kaleb didn't refuse because he wanted to get to know Tanya's family better. When they arrived at Tanya's home, Kaleb was warmly welcomed. The family bought food to host him and engaged in conversation to make him feel at ease. That evening, as Tanya's family is large, they gathered for dinner in a big circle. With many of Tanya's relatives present, there were nearly 15 people at the table. While they were eating, the relatives chatted with Kaleb, and there were alcoholic drinks like beer and liquor available. The family kept pouring drinks for Kaleb, who drank out of politeness until he started to feel tipsy. Suddenly, Tanya's grandmother, who was sitting at the head of the table, asked, "When are you two getting married?" Kaleb was shocked and immediately sobered up. He and Tanya had only been seeing each other for a few months and hadn't considered marriage yet. However, it seemed the family assumed that since Kaleb and Tanya were already close, they should marry according to the traditional customs of the area. That evening, Kaleb didn't respond to the question. He just gave a nervous smile, trying to mask his unease. As night fell, Kaleb prepared to take a shower, still preoccupied with the adults' insistence on the marriage issue. Many of them had repeatedly asked about it, which made him feel uneasy. He went to the bathroom and tried to turn on the light, but it wouldn't work. Thinking there might be an electrical problem, since he had noticed the other relatives rushing to shower earlier in the evening, Kaleb decided to look for a flashlight in Tanya's bedroom. Searching through the room, he eventually found a drawer by the bedside table and thought a flashlight might be inside. However, instead of a flashlight, he found an ID card with Tanya's picture on it. Puzzled, he picked up the card and discovered it was a psychiatric hospital ID card. Tanya was a patient there, and the card had been issued recently. It stated that Tanya had been diagnosed with severe bipolar disorder, also known as manic depressive illness. Seeing this, Kaleb felt an overwhelming sense of fear. Although he didn't fully understand bipolar disorder, the word psychiatric made him assume Tanya was dangerous. His mind raced with fear and misunderstanding, labeling her as mentally unstable without knowing the specifics of her condition. Kaleb quickly showered and went to bed, unable to shake his anxiety. The next morning, without saying anything to Tanya, he hurried back to Bangkok, leaving behind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. After that day, Kaleb began to distance himself from Tanya more and more. He called her less frequently and avoided contact. Tanya soon realized that Kaleb must have discovered something about her. This realization made Tanya even angrier at Kaleb, and her symptoms began to manifest. When Tanya managed to reach Kaleb, she started threatening him, saying that if he didn't resume contact with her, she would harm herself. She even called Kaleb's mother, which shocked him as he hadn't expected her to find his mother's contact information. Kaleb, alarmed by these developments, called Tanya and pleaded with her not to do anything drastic. However, Tanya didn't listen. The last straw was when Tanya called Kaleb's mother and claimed that she was pregnant with his child. His mother, shocked by this revelation, immediately called Kaleb, who didn't know how to respond. Tanya also threatened that if Kaleb didn't return to her, she would ruin his military career. This caused Kaleb significant distress as the situation kept escalating. Kaleb frequently called Kim for advice, admitting that he was too mentally drained to focus on anything. Every time he was at the military camp, he anxiously watched the entrance, unsure when Tanya might show up or what she might do. One day, Tanya called Kaleb again and said that if he wanted to resolve everything, he should come to her room to talk things over. Kaleb consulted with Kim about what to do, and Kim advised him to meet in a public place instead. Kim reasoned that meeting in Tanya's room could be dangerous, as there might be other people present or unforeseen risks. Kaleb tried to negotiate with Tanya using Kim's advice, suggesting they meet in a public place. However, Tanya refused and insisted that Kaleb come to her room if he truly wanted to resolve the matter. Eventually, Kaleb felt he had no choice but to agree. The next day, Kaleb traveled to Tanya's room. When he arrived, he knocked on the door, and Tanya opened it. As soon as she saw him, she made a strange face and rushed to the bathroom to vomit, seemingly showing symptoms of morning sickness. She then turned to Kaleb and asked which perfume he was wearing, complaining about the smell. Seeing Tanya's condition, Kaleb found it odd. He was already skeptical about her claim of being pregnant, and her behavior didn't align with that of a genuinely pregnant person. Her appearance and actions didn't convince him. He asked if she was really experiencing morning sickness and if she had any hospital documentation confirming her pregnancy. Tanya hesitated and was unable to provide a clear answer, further fueling Kaleb's doubts. Before she could answer, Tanya explained that she hadn't kept any documents because she feared her parents would find out. Hearing this, Kaleb became convinced that Tanya was lying about being pregnant to manipulate him into staying. Determined not to be deceived, he decided he wouldn't put up with it anymore. A heated argument ensued, and Tanya's symptoms began to flare up again. However, this time Kaleb was resolute. Knowing the truth, he was determined to end things and leave Tanya's room. Ignoring her words, he turned and headed for the door. As he was about to exit, Tanya ran to the balcony of her fifth-floor apartment. Crying and shouting, she threatened, "If you leave, you'll have to pick up my corpse from the ground below." At that moment, Kaleb was shocked. He tried to calm her down, but it was futile. Tanya insisted that he stay with her and forbade him from leaving. Suddenly, Kaleb thought to himself that if Tanya could lie about being pregnant, she probably wouldn't actually jump. He decided to open the door and quickly ran downstairs. As he fled, he heard Tanya's enraged screams echoing from the room. Kaleb reached the ground floor and was about to run out of the apartment building when he heard a loud thud behind him. He froze, praying it wasn't what he feared. When he turned around, he saw Tanya's lifeless body on the ground. She had jumped from the upper floor and died on impact. Everyone nearby screamed in shock and quickly called for emergency services. Kaleb stayed at the scene as they moved Tanya's body. When the police arrived, they questioned Kaleb since he had been the last person with her. After that day, Tanya's family took her body for the funeral rites. Kaleb didn't attend the funeral, fearing that her relatives might blame or even harm him. About 2 weeks passed, and it seemed like everything had settled down. One day, Kaleb went to stay over at his friend Ted's house. Ted's house was a single-story home, and in his bedroom, the bed was positioned with its head against a window. Beside the bed stood a large wardrobe, with a gap between the bed and wardrobe just wide enough for someone to walk through. That night, Ted slept on the side of the bed closest to the wardrobe, while Kaleb slept on the other side. As Kaleb was drifting off to sleep, he noticed Ted acting strangely. Ted suddenly moved to sleep on the floor beside the bed, leaving his pillow on the bed. Kaleb didn't ask him about it, thinking Ted might simply not like sleeping with a pillow. He tried to go back to sleep. A while later, Kaleb felt a pressure on his chest, making it hard to breathe. His eyes were closed, but he tried to open them, only to find he couldn't. He struggled for breath and attempted to move, but his body wouldn't respond. Suddenly, he rolled off the bed and fell into the gap between the bed and the wardrobe, hitting the floor hard, yet still unable to move. After what felt like almost half an hour, Ted woke him by shaking him. Kaleb woke up in a panic, drenched in sweat. He was startled to find Ted's parents and grandmother in the room. Ted's grandmother asked Kaleb if he was all right. Trying to regain his composure, Kaleb said he was fine and that he had just fallen off the bed. The grandmother, however, mentioned that he had been yelling incoherently, which had prompted them to check on him. Kaleb had no recollection of this. The grandmother suggested that Kaleb sleep in her room with her and Ted, thinking it might be more comforting for him. Once Kaleb moved to her room, everything seemed normal, and he was able to sleep peacefully. The next morning, Kaleb asked Ted why he hadn't slept on his pillow. Ted explained, "How could I sleep with my pillow when I saw a woman sitting on the windowsill? She had one foot on your pillow and the other on mine." Hearing this, Kaleb was shocked. He was convinced that the spirit Ted had seen must have been Tanya's. Kaleb started to share these experiences with Kim and his mother. Since that incident, more strange occurrences began happening to Kaleb. His friends would sometimes tease him, saying they saw him walking with a woman and wondered why he never introduced her to them, even though he was walking alone. Whenever Kaleb tried to talk to or flirt with someone, those people would experience odd things, and Kaleb himself noticed strange happenings around him. The most disturbing incident occurred when Kaleb was sleeping next to his new girlfriend. He was lying with his back to her when he heard a whisper right next to his ear saying, "Why didn't you come to collect my body?" Startled, he turned around and, instead of seeing his girlfriend, he saw Tanya's face inches from his. Though her body was still facing the other direction, Kaleb was so terrified that he screamed out loud. His girlfriend woke up, alarmed, and asked what was wrong. But Kaleb couldn't bring himself to explain what he had seen. The most intense incident happened one night when Kaleb returned to sleep in his own room alone. He suddenly heard something fall in the bathroom, followed by the sound of someone walking around. When he opened the bathroom door to check, he found Tanya squatting next to the toilet, smiling at him. Kaleb was shocked and paralyzed with fear. To make matters worse, he saw the head of a child emerging from the toilet. Unable to stay in the room any longer, Kaleb called his mother and asked to stay with her. His mother, seeing how disturbed he was, suggested that Kaleb ordain as a monk, hoping it might bring some peace and resolution to his troubles. However, despite the suggestion, Kaleb never went through with becoming a monk. Just a few days before his ordination, Kaleb returned to his dorm room to collect the remaining items he had left behind. That night, he suddenly called his mother in the middle of the night, around 2 a.m. When Kaleb's mother answered the phone, Kaleb spoke with a trembling voice. "Mom, Mom, it's here again, Mom, it's here again." Kaleb's mother, still groggy from sleep, asked, "What's wrong? Where are you now?" Kaleb responded, "It's following me, Mom. I'm hiding on the rooftop." Upon hearing this, his mother became alarmed because Kaleb was not making sense and was on the rooftop. She tried to calm him down, but suddenly there were sounds of Kaleb shouting, followed by the phone going silent. His mother was extremely worried and tried to speak into the phone, but there was no response. After a while of silence, a woman's voice suddenly said, "Go pick up his body," and the call was disconnected. Kaleb's mother was shocked because she recognized the voice. It was Tanya's, the same voice that had called her before. She collapsed in tears, not knowing what had happened to Kaleb, and Kaleb's father had to comfort her. Less than half an hour later, another call came in from an unknown number. The person on the other end asked, "Is this your son?" and described Kaleb's appearance and gave his full name. Then he said, "I'm sorry, your son jumped off a building. He has passed away." Upon hearing this, Kaleb's mother was in shock. Later, they reviewed the security camera footage from nearby and saw that Kaleb had gone to the rooftop alone, looking around frantically as if terrified of something. He then left his phone on the rooftop and jumped, resulting in his death.